Welcome to the Champs App podcast, where we help players and parents demystify the world of minor hockey development and recruiting for both girls and boys. On this episode, I talk with Allison Coomey, who is the associate head coach at Penn State's women's ice hockey program. We talk about coaching Marie-Philippe Poulin and why she is such a special player. And we also discuss Penn State's women's hockey program and why they are so stingy at giving up goals. I really enjoyed this conversation with Allison, and I hope you do too. Before we get to our guest, if you enjoyed this episode and want us to keep making more of them, please share it with teammates and friends. You can also subscribe, like, follow, and even better, it would be great if you would leave us a review. Now, let's drop the puck and get to the show. I'm very excited to have on today's podcast Allison Coomey, who is the Penn State associate head coach. She's originally from Baldwinsville, New York, just outside Syracuse. She played hockey and lacrosse at Niagara University, and she's been coaching in women's hockey for 19 seasons. So with stints at her alma mater, 9 years at Boston University, and then the last 3 years at Penn State. So welcome, associate head coach Allison Coomey. Hi, Allison.
Hi, Ray. Thanks for having me.
Hey, so awesome to have you. Hey, so just like everybody else that I've had on the podcast, it'd be great if you could just kind of walk us through your hockey history, starting in Baldwinsville, New York.
Yeah, so I started playing hockey when I was 7. Prior to that, when I started skating, my mom actually wanted us to be figure skaters. I have a twin sister, and so they got us into figure skating, my parents, and but we always used to go watch my brother. He's about 10 years older, so we'd go watch him play hockey and just fell in love with it, just watching him play. And typically like you're running around the rink, but we would just sit there and watch most of the time. And just so my parents were like, well, why don't we just try it, try hockey, and never look back. Obviously still doing it as a career.
Did your brother try and make either you or your sister play nets? Because that seems to be a consistent story of the older brother or brothers making their younger sister play goalie.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. He almost kind of like phased out of hockey before we really got into it, but we would make each other play goalie.
All right.
So it was like my sister and I would go back and forth as to who was playing in net down in the basement that day. But
Nice.
so
And so were you playing travel hockey, house league hockey, and were you playing on boys teams or girls teams?
yeah, so up until we were 12, we played in a house league boys team. And so there were, just my sister and I. There were a couple girls on other teams. During our last year of house league, they developed an all girls team. We actually ended up winning the championship that year. Which
Of course.
Cool.
Yeah.
Of course. And then my dad and a dad put together a travel team. So we would travel to, there used to be this big tournament in Connecticut we traveled to every year, and other tournaments. And so really, for about 4 to 5 years, that's where I really developed. One, just playing girls hockey, I think helped, just feeling comfortable in that environment. And we'd go to camps and stuff, but there wasn't a lot going on outside of just the typical season.
What was the key to your success in your hockey development? Was it your coaches? Was it playing with boys, which I've heard from some of the other coaches that I've spoken to? What is it that was the key to you becoming such a great hockey player and also lacrosse player? Because you were doing both at the same time, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it was being able to play multiple sports. Growing up, you had a hockey season from October to February, and then you're playing other sports in the fall and you're playing other sports in the spring. I do think part of it was playing with the boys growing up. Like you had to, it just being a girl in a boys world, you're different, right? So like there's always that element of just trying to have to prove yourself. So that, having a twin sister, I think we were always like, as much as we support each other, we were always pretty competitive with each other too. So I do think that helped.
What position did your sister play? Because I believe you were a forward. So
yeah, she was a forward too, actually.
Okay.
So, but yeah, we were really close. And I do think that the fact that our parents had us in multiple sports, the cerebral part of the game is so important, and just understanding the game. And I think playing multiple sports allows you to understand the game of hockey a little bit more as well.
Okay. And so obviously playing multiple sports was really key to you becoming such a great athlete. What was the process of getting recruited by Niagara University like?
Yeah, it was interesting. My sister and I obviously like wanted to play in college together, but weren't really like pursuing that option as much. So we both applied to different schools and looked at different schools, D1, D3. kind of a combination. And really, I wanted to be an engineer. I thought I wanted to be an engineer. So like kind of narrowing your choices that way too, of like what you want to study and all that. And Niagara came about. It was a brand new program. So Margot Page, who was the new head coach at the time, had been involved with Hockey Canada and went to the Olympics, after I played there as a coach. But just really, it was one of those things where you just step on campus and I felt comfortable. It wasn't too far from home for me, which was important, but also far enough. And just being a part of something new and something exciting, where you can like leave your mark, I think was something that really intrigued me. And then it allowed, my sister and I to go to the same place in the end, which was also a lot of fun.
And did you and your sister both play two sports, or did she play
We
any
did.
varsity? Yeah.
Yep, we both played hockey and lacrosse there. So, I mean, it was a unique thing. We weren't, by no means did we have any intention of playing lacrosse as well. But our high school lacrosse program was so strong that when we went to Niagara, we could step on and be pretty productive at that level. Which, I mean, it was still Division One, but we felt comfortable with it. It
Yeah.
wasn't something where it was too hard where we couldn't do both. And then back then, you could play two sports in college and it not really be too much of an issue.
Gotcha. And you're now our third guest who's played two sports in college. We had
Yeah.
Kara Mori, who played field hockey and ice hockey at Brown, and then Tara Connolly played exactly like you
Oh, yeah.
guys,
Yep.
lacrosse and hockey. So I need to ask you the same question I asked them. Did you ever have the opportunity to play both sports in the same day, where you went from one sport to the other?
I definitely, towards the end of my hockey career, we would practice in the morning because there were a bunch of us that student taught. And then at night, lacrosse would have practice. So it was kind of like at that point in the season, in hockey season, you don't want to get hurt. So you're not doing too much. But
Yeah.
I do remember practicing in the morning. And then because it was still snowy out, we were in the gym playing lacrosse. So I
Nice.
definitely remember a few times that happening.
All right. So it sounds like you had a great career at Niagara. So tell us about, what you decided to do once you graduated from Niagara and getting into coaching, because at least from what I can tell, you almost immediately went into coaching right after graduation.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I think it's harder some years and easier maybe to get into coaching if that's what you want to do. But I went to school for education. And so my whole plan after college was to pursue a master's degree. My mom was a teacher. She's like, you need your master's degree to teach, essentially, especially in New York. So that was really my goal. One of my coaches at Niagara ended up going to Connecticut College as a head coach. So she had called me during my senior year and asked if I'd be interested in helping her out. And I was like, this is great. I can coach. I can start to pursue a master's career. And that's really how I got into it. And I was working with somebody that I knew really well. So for me, it was a really easy transition to getting into coaching. Obviously, being a captain at Niagara, I think helped in that, just understanding that role. Whereas I was a young coach, but having to deal with players that were essentially my age, some of them. So that's really how I got into it, and just fell in love with it. And my pursuit of a master's degree, I ended up getting one in school counseling, but now I get to use both of those degrees.
Yeah, use it every day, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So you were in Division III for a little while with Connecticut College and Plattsburgh. Let's talk about your experiences there, especially Plattsburgh, which is clearly the one of the premier Division III programs even
Yeah.
today.
Yep, totally. Yeah, so Connecticut College was a great experience. One, the NESCAC school. It's a great academic institution. So there, it was interesting. I went from Niagara, where, one story, like we used to take bus rides all the time, because we were furthest from everybody.
Yeah.
But we would watch movies the whole time. And the first bus ride at Con College, I remember the kids all getting on the bus. No one turns on the TV. Everyone's studying, and I was like, this is so different, so different. So it was fun. It was a really fun year. And then after that year, like I said, while I continued to pursue a master's degree, I wasn't able to get it at Con College, the degree I wanted. So I went. So I continued. Like, I loved coaching, so I was like, is there another opportunity to me to continue to do this? And Plattsburgh and Elmira were both looking for assistants at the time. So I looked at both of those places and ended up at Plattsburgh, Kevin Hoole's first year. So right before he started winning consecutive national championships. But the thing I really liked about that was, all the student athletes were treated like Division I student athletes, and I could only speak to playing Division I that I could see that. But I loved the drive. There were a lot of Canadians that really didn't know the difference between like a Plattsburgh and a Niagara. So they didn't know the difference between a Division III school and Division I school. They just wanted to play hockey.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I would have stayed there if my coach from Niagara didn't call. Like I
So
definitely
yeah, so let's talk about you going back to your alma mater as an assistant coach.
Yeah. So the opportunity came up. One of my former assistants that I played for ended up leaving to go to Ohio State, and that spot opened. And my previous head coach called and asked if I'd be interested. And of course, like it was like my dream job to go back to Niagara, and really like we were successful especially my senior year at Niagara. Went to the Frozen Four as a Division I program, and just kind of put like a small school on the map. And so I really wanted to go back and try and replicate that to the best I could, but just really create a good experience for the players that wore the same jersey.
Yeah,
I
and
did.
unfortunately, Niagara University's women's hockey program is no longer in existence. That happened a little bit after you left, but
Yeah, yeah, it happened about 10 years after the year we made the Frozen Four, so it was pretty
it's
sad.
yeah. Luckily, there's been several new D1 teams that have been added since Niagara, Wayne State, and I think North Dakota discontinued their programs. But I think net it's been a positive, and hopefully even going more in that direction. And I believe the year before you left, one of the players that you were recruiting was a previous guest on this podcast, Sarah Zaharias. So maybe you can give us a scouting report on recruiting her. If I'm assuming you were involved in recruiting Sarah.
Yeah, I was. I mean, from what I remember of Sarah, and this was a while ago. Obviously, I'm older than quite older than she was, but I do remember her being a very active. She was very active in the recruiting process. So she didn't like allow her parents to do any of it. I just remember her being very like at the forefront of any conversations you had with her. It was always with her and not really her parents. And not to say that parents shouldn't be involved, but it is nice to see a student athlete who's pursuing a college of their choice.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's what they want. So I do remember her being very vocal about like what she wanted, and just very mature. I do remember her being very mature about the whole process as well.
So showing some head coach material, which is what she's doing right now at
Yeah,
Balmoral Hall
it's
as a head
great.
coach
Like
there.
I've definitely had conversations with her, and it's great to see her in that coaching role for sure.
That's awesome. All right. So unfortunately, you didn't get to see Sarah play at Niagara because you moved on to Boston University. Maybe you can talk about your 9 years there working with Brian DeRoche, who has been at Boston for, I think, since the beginning of time, I believe, since before hockey was invented.
He's been there for a while. But
Yeah.
no, like it's funny. I had golfed with Brian probably 3 years prior to me going there. At our conventions, we'd golf together. So I knew him for a while. And so when the job opened up, uh, obviously, there's people you reach out to, and I was lucky that he reached out to me. He had just hired one of my former assistants at Niagara, Katie LaChapelle. So she called me too to try and convince me to get there. And it was, obviously one of the best decisions I made. I was scared to go to a city, never lived in Boston. But working with those two for 9 years was great. A lot of fun. So many good memories, and obviously some great success. But Brian, obviously being an alum of that program, just knows how to sell it, and he's really a really good recruiter. But bottom line, he cares about every one of his student athletes as people, and I think that's where you get the most out of them. So
All right. And while you're there, were you coaching the forwards or the defense? Because I know you played forward, and at Penn State you coached D. But what was your role at Boston University?
Yeah, at BU, I coached forwards.
Okay.
So Katie had a little bit more experience at D. And so yeah, for 9 years there, I coached forwards. I think there were numerous conversations of us switching at some point, but we never did.
All
We always
right.
stuck with it. So that was part of the reason why when I came here, I wanted to try something different.
I gotcha. I gotcha. So let me ask you a couple important questions. So one of the players that you were coaching was Marie-Philippe Poulin, who is an all-star with the Canadian national team. And so a couple of questions. First, what makes her one of the best players in the world? And second, what were you doing to make her play more defensively that it took her 3 years to be the leading scorer on Boston University?
Those are two great questions. No, uh, for her, I mean, she's such a student of the game. But she makes players around her better. I think that's a telltale sign of a great player. They make the people around them better. She could play with anyone and get them, you know, a 20 goal season.
Yeah.
Not to say that her line mates were not great players too, but they were. But she's just that type of person and just so humble. One thing I do remember about her, and she'd probably still do it, when she scores, she points to the person that passed it to her. It's never about her. And so I think that's a big reason why she, maybe was never, it's crazy to say, like, was only an All-American, I think, once. And Patty never won a Patty Kaz. And it's never about her. So that's the one thing I've really taken away from
Yeah.
her.
And in her second year, she only played, I think, 16 games out of 30 some odd games. Probably she was
Yeah,
a
her
massive
total
program.
career, I think her total career was like 3 seasons out of 4,
Yeah.
with injuries and whatnot. So
Yeah.
that'll do it too.
All right. That's so before we get to Penn State, you've now coached in different conferences at different levels. Maybe talk about just the differences between conferences and what it's like from a team perspective to be in a different conference and what the implications are.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I really liked about Hockey East is the travel was amazing.
Yeah.
So, you're in your bed most nights, with that. There's more teams in that conference. So uh it's just different. Like you're seeing different teams, more often, whereas in the CHA there's only 6 of us, so you see the same teams. And I would say it's a little bit more of like a gritty conference. Like it's tough to get through because everyone plays so hard. And I don't know what that is. I don't know what makes the CHA like that. But that's from, like, as an outsider looking in, that's what I see. um and so I would say, like, those are the like pretty big discrepancies, with those two conferences. And the good thing about women's college hockey in general is the amount of non-conference games you play. So, like, in the CHA, we have 20 conference games, so we have 14 non-conference, which is essentially half your schedule,
Yeah.
is non-conference. So I think for us it allows us to play, um more teams from the West and the East, than maybe a Hockey East, where they just have more teams, so there's less games to give on the other end.
Sure. All right. So before we get to Penn State, you've also been involved with USA Hockey. Maybe just talk about the roles that you've played coaching with them, and then and I know some of it was being a scout for the under-18 team. So we'll get to that as well. So
Yeah, I've worked numerous camps, U18 camps, U22, and then the national camps, and just, I mean, just a really great experience in being around players that are so driven, and they care so much about the sport. And participating in Zoom calls this summer where there's so much conversation on what's happening outside the game. And so as much as they care about their own, pursuit of making a national team or making an Olympic team, there's way more focus on how to leave the game a better place than they started. So I really like, it's been a great experience just to be involved in all of that, really. And then the scouting that kind of came up, it was almost like a last minute type thing. I think they they realized they maybe wanted that role or needed that role for the U18s. This was back in, what was it, 2019. Was in Japan, and my main role there was just to scout the opponents, so their special teams and whatnot. And
Was there any secondary benefit to you also using that as a recruiting opportunity for Penn State? Because I noticed you have 5 or 6 Canadians and a Swedish player on your team, and maybe that's how they got on your radar.
yeah, I mean, I I think they were on the radar already, but it was nice to see them in those environments. Like Kiara Zanin and Mal Uline from our current team were there, so it was cool to see them before they came to Penn State, and really what they what they did for Team USA.
Nice. And for kids who are, for players today who are probably going to be going to their first USA development camps, whether at the regional or national level, what advice would you give them? And maybe what is it that, when you were there, what were the things that you were looking for them from them when they came to these camps?
Yeah, I mean, I know every player that goes to those camps is their ultimate goal is to make the U18 team, right? So as much as development is what we're looking for, we understand that that's their ultimate goal. So the only advice I would give is like that's not the end all. There's plenty of national team players that never made a U18 team. There's plenty of U18 players that never made a national team. So there is like everyone gets to where they need to be at a certain point. And so just to focus on like what you can bring and what your strengths are, but also like what you need to work on. I think a lot of players are so focused on being a certain way when all they really need to understand is you already have like this and what you can bring to the table. So just focus on like what you're good at,
Yeah.
and what you can bring. So, and just have fun. It's such a great environment to, you know, at those camps, just to meet players from all over the world.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
country, sorry,
All
country.
over the US. Yeah, exactly. So, all right, let's move on to your coming to Penn State. Maybe talk a little bit about the origin of Penn State hockey, and Kim and Terry Pagula, how they got involved. For folks who don't know, they basically sponsored the program. They own the Buffalo Sabres, and they also were deeply involved with Penn State. So maybe talk about that and how you ended up at Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, so grateful for the rink and everything they've provided for us. They actually built, our facility has a practice rink. And so their intention in building the rink, not only for the university, but for the community to really grow hockey in this area. Obviously it's a continual process, and, being right in the center of Pennsylvania, there's not a lot of, there's not a lot going on outside of it. So, we're very fortunate that we have that ability.
And I would encourage folks to go on YouTube and look at the amazing facilities that they have. If you want to see a tour of all the hockey facilities, it's pretty impressive. And the rink is pretty sweet, if not the nicest new rink out there. So
Yeah, it's nice. The Sabres and the Penguins came 2 years in a row. My first 2 years here. They've been here numerous times, but they used our locker rooms, our men's and women's locker rooms, and you could hear them just talking about like how nice the facility was. So if pro players are saying that,
oh,
then
for sure, it's nicer than some NHL teams. I guarantee you that. Yeah.
yeah.
So you've been there for 3 years. How did you end up there?
Yeah. So obviously being a BU for 9 years, great experience, loved it. And for me, it was just being a career coach. I think just having the ability to maybe venture out and do something different. Jeff Campersall got hired 3 years ago, and he came over from Princeton and called and asked if I would be interested. And I've always, Jeff's somebody I've always admired. He in a lot of ways he's very similar to Brian, very similar to Kevin Hool. Really all the coaches I've worked for, Margot and Kristen Steele, just very caring, like just want the best for their student athletes. And at the end of the day, that's what they care about the most. And so knowing Jeff for a long time, I mean, and he's not old, but when I was playing at Niagara, he was coaching at Princeton. So I've known him for a long time, and just was excited for an opportunity to really hopefully put Penn State on the mark.
Yeah.
and do something here.
So there's Jeff, there's you, and I believe Melissa is the third coach. So how do you work together, and how do you divide responsibilities, both on the kind of team, winning side and on the recruiting side?
Yeah, I mean, she's been a great addition. Obviously playing at the highest level with the national team, and at Quinnipiac, had a great career there. I think she brings that instant credibility with her. So for being somebody who's, a year removed, 2 years removed from the college game, there is that there's just that instant, you know, just
Credibility.
yeah, credibility with it. So it's great to have her, and I think the kids really respect what she's done and what she brings.
And you focus on the defense, right? So what's that transition been like from focusing on the forwards to focusing on defense? And for folks who don't know, like your team is just doing superb this year. You're 13-1-2, and only giving up a handful of goals all season. So I want to talk more about defense, but just talk about your role.
Yeah, I coach the D. I coach the D on the bench during games, and in practices when we split up, I'll take the D. But I mean, we're lucky. We've got some pretty talented defensemen. I think the thing that I've realized, just coming from coaching the forwards for so long, I feel like I've learned so much from that, like a different perspective,
Yeah.
of the game. So it's been great to really, I ask them questions a lot, like, what do you see, or what, just different questions that I'm curious about. So,
So
um,
without giving away too many secrets, how do you teach defense? So like, is it positionally where you are on the ice? It's like offensive zone tactics where you're trying to like gap up. So before the other team even starts, is it just basic stuff like sticks and lanes? Like what's the level of sophistication that you're doing stuff? And I also believe PK is one of your key strengths as well. So
yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's like less is more. So try not to overcoach. Maybe point out like little things here and there that they, that maybe they don't see, and a video could help them see. But really trying to not do too much of the coaching and thinking for them, where it has to become instinctual. And obviously we try to recruit talented players that can see the game well. So it's really just fine tuning,
okay.
to a certain extent.
What advice would you give a youth player, someone playing girls hockey today on the defensive side of things? So I was at a tournament this past weekend, and all the players, they all want to hold on to the puck and do stuff on the offensive side.
That,
Second that puck turns over, well, not everybody's is working just as hard on defense as they are on offense.
yeah, I mean, that's tough because it's the same thing. I watch games now, and D are so offensive, which is great. Um, but they need to be defensive. Like in our game, they need to come back and help out. Obviously we're trying to recruit the best goaltender. So,
That
if something
yeah.
breaks down, they can do it. But yeah, it is tough, and I do think it's important for youth coaches to really have an emphasis on that part of the game, because when players get here, it's definitely something that needs to be important, just as important, I would say.
Okay, so obviously you're pretty good at coaching. In 2019, you were named the AHCA Women's Hockey Assistant Coach of the Year. So congratulations on that. So that
Yep.
leads us, and then you got promoted to associate coach, I believe, last year at the end of last season. So I'm really curious because this is really confusing to me. What's the difference between an assistant coach and an associate coach?
There's really not. I don't know if there's really much different. The day-to-day stuff is all the same. So to me, I don't know. I think it's just a title change, and hopefully a little bit more credibility. Not that 19 years shouldn't shouldn't hold some credibility, but
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that you try and do all the work during practices. So when you get to the game, kind of you let the players play. So what do you like during a game? I like to ask all the coaches: are you calm behind the bench, or are you like yelling at the refs, or are you talking to your players all the time? What's your personality while during a game?
I would say I'm pretty laid back on the bench. There's obviously times where the games get heated and you get a little frustrated. And I'm not much of a yeller in general. So, for me, again, like I do think like less is more during game time. If you're always constantly, like if I'm always constantly talking to the players, like what is that stress level going to look like
Yeah.
for them? So
Especially if
uh,
they're just trying to please you or follow, follow exactly what you're telling them to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and for me, it's like I can't get too high because then they're just going to get very hyper. So I do think that the coaches, the coaches have a significant role in how the team acts, in their, um, yeah, just the overall demeanor
Okay.
of the team.
And obviously it's been very successful. Like I mentioned earlier, your team is having one of the best seasons it's had since the program began. Talk about how you've gotten over the hump this season and what you think how you were able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it is just like the discipline that's had to go into this year. So our players, like from mid-August, we've asked a lot of them, and they've done a great job of handling it as a team. I do think success, like helps with certain things. But we've had a great. I mean, Natalie Heising is our captain. She's been here, this is her fourth year, and just she's been through a lot just with like the changing of coaching staffs and culture, and she's done a really good job, and I do think having 9 freshmen come in and them really not knowing the difference, but coming from successful programs where they know what it takes to win, has also helped. But overall, like just the buy-in of the group as a whole, and the day to day, we get tested every day, so they have to,
Mm.
like, they just have to be
Discipline.
have to be on top of everything, you know?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, tell us what the remainder of the season looks like for your team, because I think you only have a few more games, and then you have a weekend of playoffs coming up in early March.
Yeah, so we've got 2 more away weekends. We travel to RIT this weekend, and then we travel to Mercyhurst the following weekend, and then yeah, the first week in March is our playoffs, back in Erie, Pennsylvania. So it's coming down to the wire, which is
Yeah,
crazy. I feel
yeah.
like it's going so fast.
It really has. I mean, especially since you've only played, I believe, like 16 games this season, so it's a pretty
Yeah.
short season. But before we get into the recruiting process, I do have one Penn State question for you, which is a little sensitive, which is, what has the university done to protect athletes since the football controversy from about 10 years ago? So, as any player or parent thinking about considering Penn State, it'd probably be helpful for them to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many background checks. So staff has to do background checks. We do. I mean, I think we do like three different like training sessions and a background check every year, or every 4 years is like a fingerprint. Like just like that's pretty strict on what we do. And then anytime we have camps, everyone that works our camps has to have background checks and certain surveillance tests done. So
Perfect. Tell us about your recruiting process, and not necessarily you, but Division I teams. What is it that you're looking for players? Has speed become more important over the last few years? What are things that get you excited when you're going to either tournaments or showcases or development camps that get you really excited about watching a player?
yeah, I mean, speed's definitely gone up since I played, even in the last 5 years, I'd say. Also just like off ice strength, and so doing it safely, but we recognize, in our first year, after our players freshman year, how much stronger they get, um, and I think that's even lessened because they're coming in so such great shape. So I think that part of it, for me, it's just I've seen so much. We just want good kids. Like, we want good players. We want good character people, team players, and that's something, if that's hard to see when we go out to showcases. It's even harder to see on video, because when you do go to showcases, you can at least see like the body language, the demeanor on the bench, how they talk to people, how they talk to their coaches, their parents, maybe outside of the rink,
Yeah.
and I think for that, coming into a program here where we've worked on changing a culture and making it a team first place. That's such an important thing because it takes so long to build that up, but it only takes one person to really turn it around, in a negative way. So just making sure that we do our homework, call coaches.
I was
talk
going
to
to
players.
ask you about that. I mean, tell us about the reference checks, so to speak, that you do before,
Yeah.
making an offer to a player.
Yeah, I mean, an offer's a big deal, even if it's just a spot, and I don't want to say just a spot, but if it's a spot on your team, it's a big deal because they're part of your locker room, they're part of your family. So we try to have conversations with multiple people, not just their coach, but maybe their previous coach. Obviously, like them and their parents together is also interesting to see the dynamics that sometimes families have. But yeah, to as much homework as we can if we're offering a spot on the team. And again, if it's a scholarship spot, it's a lot. That's a lot that's a big investment. So making sure we're doing our homework that way too.
Can I ask you just a general question, not necessarily Penn State, about scholarships versus non-scholarships? So I believe you get 18 scholarships that can be divided up amongst as many players as you want. What about the players? So depending on the team, there's usually somewhere between 20 and maybe 25 players on a roster. So
Yep.
how are those, 5 to 7 players, handled that don't have that don't get a scholarship at scholarship schools?
Yeah, I mean, everything else is the same. Like you're treated the same. You get everything um, that that the other student athletes would get. Maybe your books aren't paid for, but everything else, apparel, everything, equipment, everything's paid for. Um, and then with scholarship schools, if a school has 18, they can split it up any way they want, so they don't have to give out 18 fulls and have the rest on full walk-ons.
And
But
how are scholarships decided or not given out to some players? What's obviously every school is different, but what are the factors that come into that decision?
I mean, sometimes it's location of where you're recruiting players from. If they're from a different country, maybe they just the affordability of coming to university, you might have to give more money to them to get them to come.
Yeah.
Um,
Is it based on skill and ability, or is it more financial? Is it
I mean, bottom line, skill and ability, I would say, is why you're giving out a scholarship. But a given year, you might not be able to give out a scholarship to a top kid because you just don't have money for that position, or you just don't have it. So trying to work ways to give them money and give them money down the line. But it's very tricky, like the how to work with it, and then to like offering scholarships years out, which has been more of a trend than now, has really made it interesting for the coming years.
yeah, it's like the NHL managing a salary cap. You got to kind of
Yeah, yeah.
figure out all the puts and takes. All right. So can you explain how COVID is impacting the recruiting for, your seniors, let's say, and your incoming class, and what is it you're looking at in general terms, what the kind of the general impact is for Division I recruiting because of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's challenging, obviously with the NCAA granting that extra year, but institutions leaving it up to the institutions whether they're going to be able to pay for that extra year. I really highly doubt a lot of programs will be able to fund, their seniors for another year. Um, and like adding on top of those 18 scholarships, I doubt that's going to happen. So it's just having those conversations with current seniors, and then again with players coming in, like because no one anticipated
Yeah.
maybe seniors staying back or whatnot. I do think it makes it a challenge for the next few years, just as far as numbers go with teams.
And how
um,
will for example, can you give us an example of what you think that might look like?
I mean, a given year, you could have 5 seniors that all want to stay. So let's say they all decide they're going to pay their own way to come back and start a master's. But you have 5 new kids coming in, so now you've added basically 5 players to
To your
a
roster?
23-person roster,
Yeah.
which just makes it a little bit challenging, for that year, especially for players coming in thinking that, all right, I'm one of 23. So if we're dressing 21 skaters or 21 players, there's
Yeah.
only 2 people sitting out as opposed to maybe now 5 or 6 people sitting out a game.
Okay.
So it makes it hard. It makes it hard. But I do think there's programs starting up. There's programs that can't keep those seniors because they don't have master's programs. So it's
So what
all kind
advice?
of like, I mean, we won't know the impact until probably next year or the year
Yeah.
after.
What advice do you have for like the 2022s and the 2023s who are kind of got caught in this COVID cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I just think if you love the game, you're gonna find a place. Like I do think Division 3 is gonna get stronger because of this, which is which will be great to see. And so I would really hate for players to stop playing because they don't think that there's an opportunity for them to play.
Yeah.
Um, but it also just having conversations with the programs and the coaches that you're interested in. Obviously, we can't talk to 23s right now, but in June
Yeah.
we can, and
Yeah.
maybe going, asking your coach like, where do you see me? And some coaches are really good at knowing, like, if they've had previous players that have gone Division 1 or Division 3, knowing what that looks like. I think trusting your coach too, if you play for a program that has that experience.
And since you were in Division 3 coaching and obviously Division 1 now, what advice would you give a player or a parent who is kind of on the cusp between maybe being, just quote unquote fourth liner in Division 1 or maybe in the stands versus, a top player at a Division 3 program?
Yeah, I think they really just need to be honest with what they're okay with. Some players, like, you need good fourth line players to
Yeah.
be a successful team. You need that depth to be a successful team. So if they're okay with that, then great. But you have to know, like, that you're going to be okay with it. It
Yeah.
can't just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to be okay with it, and then you show up and you're not happy.
Yeah.
Like, that's understandable, but knowing that, and then too, like, I mean, coaching when I was at Plattsburgh, and obviously they're a number one Division 3 team, but just there are like such great opportunities, and sometimes at Division 3 you can play multiple sports, more so than you can here. So
Great.
uh, yeah.
And any advice for players or parents who are, now getting, are going to pass the June 15th start time, and what advice do you have for them as they kind of going to all these recruiting events and their first showcases in the fall and
Yeah, I
tournaments
mean,
and showcases in the fall?
I would say, like, try not to stress about it. Obviously, we haven't seen hockey in a long time, so we're as coaches, I think we know that once we can get back and players get back, it's going to be a little bit different for a bit, um, because maybe some kids haven't been able to get on the ice, and so just like trusting the process of it, and it's hard to do, but know that you're not alone. Like, everyone's going through the same thing,
Yeah.
and as coaches, we're all going through the same thing as well. So.
Great. Are you going to be having, is Penn State going to be having some camps this summer, assuming COVID restrictions are lifted by then?
Yeah, we're hoping to. It really depends on what we're allowed to do on campus. So we're hoping, but we haven't gotten official. Our camp office is back and trying to set things up, but I think they're working on the field sports, because those are probably easier to
Side.
manage
Yeah.
than in facility sports. So.
Gotcha. And if folks want to learn more about the Penn State women's hockey program, how do they get more information? If they wanted to raise their hand and express interest, do you have an online form to fill out? How can people start the process?
Yeah, I mean, everything's on our website. So if you go to gopsusports.com, and click on women's ice hockey, there's questionnaires available on that, and any kind of information. I don't know if that's where you found the YouTube video, but there are videos to access behind the scenes of the rink.
Great.
So.
And if folks want to find you online or connect with you, what's the best way? You got Twitter, Instagram, email. What's the best way?
I do have all of those. um, our email address is on the website. We do just share one right now, but we run it, so we
I
would
can
get.
confirm because I sent an email to that address and you did respond. So yes, so great. Allison, best of luck with the rest of the season. It's obviously going great. So hopefully the success continues. And thank you so much for being on the Champs App podcast.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for having me.
I really want to thank Allison for coming on the podcast. After we were done, I asked her if she preferred scoring in lacrosse or in hockey. And she told me it was lacrosse because she had scored over 60 goals in lacrosse, but only a handful in hockey. However, she had a unique sidearm shot, which she developed in hockey that she used in lacrosse. So hockey was helping her lacrosse and lacrosse was helping her hockey. And remember, if you got something out of today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you'd like, follow, subscribe, and even better if you could leave us a review so we can keep sharing this important hockey information with folks just like you.